The most dangerous lie is the one told live on national television, because millions can hear it before the truth gets a chance to speak. The studio lights were so bright they erased every shadow. From the outside, the set looked flawless: polished glass panels, giant LED screens, rows of applauding audience members, and cameras gliding silently across the floor like expensive machines built to capture perfection. It was one of the most watched evening programs in America, broadcasting live from Midtown Manhattan to millions of homes across the country. Tonight's special episode was supposed to celebrate success, resilience, and leadership. At least, that was what the advertisements promised. Alicia Brooks sat quietly in a cream-colored chair near the center of the stage. Her deep emerald dress contrasted sharply against the silver backdrop behind her. The color suited her. It projected confidence without demanding attention. Her posture was straight. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. To anyone watching from home, she appeared composed. But composure and comfort were not the same thing. Across from her sat Richard Whitmore, Billionaire founder and CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings. His tailored black suit looked as expensive as the smile he wore for the cameras. Years of magazine covers, interviews, and public appearances had taught him exactly how to appear sincere under bright lights. To the audience, he was the image of American success. Wealthy, influential, charismatic, untouchable. The host stood between them with a practiced smile. "Richard, you've had a challenging few months. Your company has faced criticism, investors have raised concerns, and social media hasn't exactly been kind. How have you handled the pressure?" Richard chuckled softly. The audience laughed with him. "Business is never perfect," he said smoothly. "Sometimes mistakes happen. What's important is accountability." Alicia felt several cameras turn toward her. She noticed because she had spent years learning how rooms shifted before people realized they were moving. The host nodded. "And speaking of accountability, there has been a lot of discussion surrounding recent allegations involving internal management decisions. Many people have wondered whether your wife played a role." The giant screen behind them displayed headlines, articles, commentaries, speculation. Alicia's name appeared again and again beneath words like controversy and scandal. She had seen them all before. None of them surprised her anymore. Richard leaned forward slightly. "That's actually why we're here tonight." The audience grew quiet. Somewhere beyond the cameras, producers exchanged glances. Alicia remained still. "Alicia is a wonderful woman," Richard continued. "But unfortunately, some decisions were made that created confusion inside the company. We all make mistakes. What matters is owning them and moving forward." The host looked toward Alicia. "Would you like to respond?" For a brief moment, the studio became silent. Millions of viewers waited. Alicia looked toward Richard. He did not look nervous. He looked confident, certain. The expression belonged to a man who believed he controlled every outcome before the game even began. Then she noticed someone sitting near the front row of the audience. Vanessa Sterling. Young, elegant, dressed in white. Her smile was subtle but impossible to miss. She wasn't a guest on the show. She wasn't part of the panel. Yet somehow she had one of the best seats in the studio. Vanessa crossed her legs and watched Alicia with quiet satisfaction. Alicia understood the message immediately. This was not an interview. It was a performance. The apology had already been written. The blame had already been assigned. The audience simply hadn't realized it yet. The host adjusted his notes. "Alicia, many people have been waiting to hear from you directly. Is there anything you'd like to say tonight?" Richard turned toward her. His expression softened just enough for the cameras. Anyone watching from home might have mistaken it for support. Alicia recognized it for what it really was. A warning. He expected obedience. He expected gratitude. Most of all, he expected silence. For years, she had protected his reputation. For years, she had stood behind podiums she never wanted, attended charity galas she never enjoyed, and helped solve problems no one knew existed. Yet tonight, she was sitting beneath national television lights as the designated scapegoat. The audience waited. The cameras zoomed closer. The host smiled politely. Richard folded his hands. Vanessa's smile widened. Alicia slowly lifted her gaze toward the largest camera in the studio. The red light above the lens glowed steadily. Live, coast to coast, millions watching. Then she spoke her first words of the evening. "Before I apologize," she said calmly, "there's something everyone deserves to see." Alicia's words settled over the studio like a sudden change in weather. For a moment, nobody moved. The host blinked. One of the producers near the stage lowered his headset and stared toward the control booth. Even the audience seemed unsure whether they had just witnessed a mistake or the beginning of something far more dangerous. Richard's smile remained in place, but only barely. Alicia noticed it because she knew him better than anyone else in the room. She had spent 12 years watching the small changes he thought nobody could see. The slight tightening around his jaw. The brief pause before a response. The fraction of a second when confidence became calculation. Tonight, she saw all three. The host cleared his throat. What exactly do you mean? Alicia folded her hands calmly. I mean that if I am expected to accept responsibility in front of millions of people, then the public deserves the full story. Murmurs spread through the audience. Vanessa shifted in her seat. The smile that had seemed effortless moments earlier became noticeably less comfortable. Richard leaned forward. Alicia, this is not the place for internal business matters. His tone was measured, reasonable, designed for television. Alicia almost admired it. Almost. That is interesting, she replied. Because this became a public matter the moment my name was attached to accusations I did not create. The giant screens behind them continued displaying headlines and social media posts. Alicia glanced toward them. Every article carried the same implication. She was responsible. She had failed. She had damaged the company. The narrative had spread for weeks, repeated so often that many people accepted it as fact. Richard had never publicly corrected it. He had simply allowed it to grow. The host looked between them. Ratings were probably climbing by the minute. Are you saying the reports are inaccurate? Alicia looked directly into the nearest camera. I am saying they are incomplete. Somewhere in the audience, someone applauded once before quickly stopping. The room became silent again. Richard exhaled slowly. Alicia, we discussed handling this privately. No, she said softly. You discussed me accepting blame privately. The distinction landed harder than any raised voice could have. Richard sat back in his chair. Across the studio, Vanessa lowered her eyes toward her phone. Alicia noticed that too. Interesting. Very interesting. For years, Alicia had learned to trust small details. Small details revealed large truths. She remembered board meetings where million-dollar decisions had been hidden inside a single sentence. She remembered contract negotiations where fortunes changed because of one overlooked paragraph. And she remembered the first time she realized Richard had started viewing loyalty as something he was owed rather than something he earned. The audience knew none of that yet, but they were beginning to sense that the story they had been told was incomplete. The host adjusted his earpiece. Alicia, can you explain? Alicia nodded. 3 months ago, Whitmore Global launched a restructuring initiative. Publicly, investors were told the changes would improve efficiency. Internally, something very different was happening. Richard interrupted immediately. That information is confidential. Alicia turned toward him. Her expression never changed. Only when the truth becomes inconvenient. The audience reacted with another wave of whispers. Richard's face remained composed, but his fingers tightened around the armrest. Alicia continued. I reviewed every report associated with the restructuring. Every financial summary, every executive recommendation, every approval request. The host leaned forward. And what did you find? Alicia paused. Not for drama. For precision. I found decisions carrying my name that I never approved. The room froze. Even the audience seemed to stop breathing. Vanessa's phone slipped slightly in her hand. Richard's eyes locked onto Alicia. For the first time that evening, he no longer looked like a man managing a television interview. He looked like a man trying to predict a problem he could no longer control. Alicia slowly reached into her purse and rested her hand on a small silver flash drive. She did not remove it. Not yet. The gesture alone was enough. The audience saw it. The host saw it. Richard saw it. Millions of viewers saw it. Alicia looked directly into the camera once more. And the person who authorized those changes thought nobody would ever check the records. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire studio. The host stared at Alicia. Richard stared at Alicia. Even the audience appeared frozen beneath the bright white lights. For years, Alicia had learned that the most powerful moments in any negotiation were not the loud ones. They were the moments when people suddenly realized they did not possess all the information. Richard recovered first. He offered a controlled smile toward the cameras. I think we should be very careful about making accusations without context. His voice remained calm, But Alicia noticed the change. He was no longer speaking to her. He was speaking to the audience. He was attempting to regain control of the narrative. I agree, Alicia said. Context matters. She slowly removed the silver flash drive from her purse and placed it on the glass table between them. It looked small beneath the studio lights. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Yet Richard's eyes immediately moved toward it. The reaction lasted less than a second. Most viewers would never notice. Alicia did. The host shifted forward in his chair. What exactly is on that drive? Alicia looked toward him. Copies of internal authorization records, executive communications, approval logs, and archive correspondence. The audience reacted with a wave of whispers. Richard folded his hands. Anyone can compile documents and create misleading conclusions. That is true, Alicia replied. Which is why every file includes original timestamps, digital verification records, and executive approval signatures. Richard remained silent. Alicia could almost hear him calculating possible outcomes. She had watched him do it for years. Whenever investors became nervous, whenever reporters asked difficult questions, whenever a board member questioned one of his decisions, Richard always believed he could think his way out of a problem. Usually he could. Tonight felt different. Alicia turned slightly toward the audience. 3 months ago, when the restructuring process began, dozens of senior employees were told certain decisions came from my office. Several faces in the crowd nodded. The controversy had dominated financial news for weeks. Alicia continued. Employees received directives carrying my authorization code. Vendors received notices carrying my approval. Investors were informed that I supported strategic decisions I had never seen. The host frowned. You are saying someone used your authorization? I am saying the records tell a very different story than the public has been told. Vanessa shifted again in her seat. This time Alicia noticed something else. Vanessa was no longer smiling. Her attention remained fixed on Richard, almost as if she was waiting for him to fix the situation. Alicia found that revealing. Richard finally leaned forward. Alicia, if there was confusion regarding internal procedures, we could have addressed that privately. You had 92 days to address it privately. The audience went silent again. Alicia's voice never rose. She never sounded angry. That made the words land even harder. Richard looked away for the first time. Only briefly. But it happened. Alicia remembered another room years earlier. A rented office above a furniture warehouse in Brooklyn. Richard sitting across from her with unpaid invoices spread across a folding table. Back then he had listened when she spoke. Back then he had asked for her advice. Back then he had trusted her judgment. Together they had built strategies that saved contracts, attracted investors, and transformed a struggling business into a billion-dollar empire. Somewhere along the way, success convinced him that he had built everything alone. The giant screen behind the stage continued displaying headlines. Alicia glanced toward them. Every story focused on blame. Not one focused on evidence. Not one asked who benefited from the accusations. She looked back toward the camera. Millions of people were watching. There is something else everyone should understand, she said. The authorization records are only part of the story. Richard's jaw tightened. The host immediately noticed. What do you mean? Alicia rested one hand beside the flash drive. Because when I followed the approval trail, it did not stop with internal documents. The audience leaned forward. Vanessa looked suddenly uncomfortable. Richard remained perfectly still. Too still. Alicia recognized that expression. It was the same expression he wore whenever he realized a meeting was no longer proceeding according to plan. The same expression he wore before major crises emerged. Alicia met his eyes calmly. The trail led to private meetings, private recommendations, and one individual whose name appeared far more often than anyone expected. The host blinked. Whose name? Alicia looked toward the front row. For the first time that evening, Vanessa Sterling became aware that every camera in the studio had turned in her direction. Evelyn Carlyle remained exactly where she was, one hand resting lightly against the polished walnut edge of the dressing room island while the scene unfolded around her like a performance she had already seen the ending to. Dominic Astor stood near the window in his elegant black suit, holding a crystal glass that caught the warm chandelier light. Chloe Beaumont lingered beside him in white, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed proximity to power was the same thing as power itself. Dominic's mother continued folding garments into black trash bags with sharp, efficient movements, pausing only long enough to deliver another small insult disguised as practical advice. The room was full of voices, but Evelyn heard something else. She heard the quiet truth beneath them. None of these people were angry. None of them were afraid. Not yet. They believed they were witnessing the end of her story. That belief made them careless. Evelyn's dark eyes moved slowly across the room. She noticed details the others ignored. The half-empty wine glass in Chloe's hand. The faint crease of irritation near Dominic's mouth whenever his mother spoke too much. The expensive portrait hanging above the fireplace, commissioned 3 years earlier after Astor Capital completed its largest acquisition. Dominic's name appeared in gold lettering beneath the frame. Hers did not. It had always been that way. The woman who built the foundation rarely appeared on the plaque. Dominic finally looked directly at her. He seemed almost disappointed by her silence. Men like him preferred visible emotion. Anger could be dismissed. Tears could be explained away. Silence was more difficult. Silence created questions. "You could make this easier on yourself," he said. His voice remained calm, controlled, practiced. The voice investors trusted. The voice magazine reporters quoted. The voice that had once convinced Evelyn he valued partnership. "There is no reason to drag this out." Evelyn studied him for a moment. 12 years earlier, she would have recognized the exhaustion hidden behind his confidence. She would have stepped forward to protect him from whatever crisis threatened his empire. Today she noticed something different. Arrogance had replaced gratitude. Success had convinced him he was self-made. Chloe crossed her arms lightly and leaned against the marble vanity. "Honestly," she said with a small laugh, "most women would have caused a scene by now." Dominic's mother smiled approvingly. "That is because most women do not understand when something is over." Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. The irony was extraordinary. The three of them believed they understood endings. They did not realize they were standing inside the beginning of one. Her attention drifted toward the adjoining study visible through an open doorway. Beyond the shelves and leather chairs sat the built-in desk Dominic rarely used anymore. Most people would have seen furniture. Evelyn saw memory. She remembered late nights reviewing financial reports while Dominic slept upstairs. She remembered identifying risks before auditors found them. She remembered restructuring debt, calming investors, protecting acquisitions, and preserving the reputation now being used to remove her. Every success in this house carried fingerprints no one had bothered to acknowledge. Dominic followed her gaze toward the study and frowned slightly. "Is something amusing?" he asked. Evelyn looked back at him. "No," she replied quietly. "Just educational." Chloe exchanged a confused glance with his mother. Neither understood the answer. That was fine. Understanding was not required. Timing was. The room settled into an uncomfortable stillness. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, evening shadows stretched across the estate grounds. The fountain below reflected silver light. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a grandfather clock chimed the hour. The sound echoed through the hallways like a countdown no one else could hear. Dominic finished his wine and placed the glass on a nearby table. "Take what belongs to you and leave, Evelyn." His words were firm now. Final. Authoritative. He expected obedience. He always had. Evelyn glanced at the trash bags filled with clothing. The dresses. The coats. The shoes. The carefully curated symbols of status. Then she looked at Dominic. For the first time that evening, she felt absolutely certain of something. They believed those things were her value. They believed losing them would break her. They still had no idea what she was actually preparing to take. And that was the most dangerous mistake any of them had made. Evelyn Carlyle lowered her eyes briefly toward the black trash bags scattered across the marble floor. Silk dresses, tailored jackets, and expensive shoes disappeared beneath wrinkled plastic as though 12 years of loyalty could be reduced to discarded inventory. Dominic's mother continued sorting through the closet with cold efficiency. Chloe Beaumont stood nearby, watching with visible satisfaction. Dominic remained by the window, calm and confident, convinced the situation was under control. None of them noticed the shift taking place inside Evelyn. The humiliation they intended to create had already passed. What remained was clarity. She walked slowly toward the adjoining study. No one stopped her. Dominic barely glanced up. To him, she was simply gathering the last pieces of a life he had decided to replace. That assumption would become expensive. The study smelled faintly of leather, old paper, and polished wood. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls. Awards, photographs, and framed magazine covers celebrated Dominic Astor's success from every direction. Evelyn paused beside the built-in desk. Her reflection appeared faintly in the dark glass of a nearby cabinet. Calm, composed, entirely unlike the defeated woman everyone expected. Inside the lower compartment rested 2 black leather bags. Plain, elegant, unremarkable. Chloe laughed softly from the closet. She is probably looking for something sentimental. Dominic's mother answered without looking up. There is nothing sentimental worth keeping. Evelyn almost smiled again. They truly did not understand. She ignored the jewelry boxes. She ignored the designer watches. She ignored the luxury handbags carefully displayed on illuminated shelves. Wealth had never been hidden inside those things. Real power was quieter. Her fingers wrapped around the handle of the first black leather bag. Heavy. The weight came from encrypted drives, internal records, transaction maps, private correspondence, and years of documentation. The second bag held printed files, signed memoranda, archived financial schedules, authentication credentials, and handwritten notes accumulated during countless nights spent protecting the Astor empire from its own mistakes. Evelyn had never collected them for revenge. She collected them because competence leaves records. Dominic finally noticed the bags. His expression tightened slightly. Not fear. Irritation. The same expression he used whenever someone introduced an unexpected complication into an otherwise predictable day. What is in those? He asked. Evelyn lifted the second bag. Work. Dominic dismissed the answer immediately. That was another mistake. Chloe crossed the room and leaned lightly against the study doorway. You are not seriously leaving with office files. Her tone carried amusement rather than concern. You do not need paperwork anymore. Evelyn looked directly at her. That depends on who built the paperwork. Chloe frowned without understanding. Dominic's mother stepped forward from the closet. Anything related to Astor Capital belongs to this family. Evelyn met her gaze. Then perhaps the family should have paid more attention to it. Silence followed. Brief. Uncomfortable. The grandfather clock somewhere downstairs marked another passing minute. Outside the tall windows, the evening sky deepened into shades of blue and silver. The estate lights flickered on across the property. Dominic folded his arms. You are making this unnecessarily dramatic. Evelyn slipped the strap of one bag over her shoulder. No, I am making it organized. For the first time, Dominic looked genuinely confused. He had prepared for anger. He had prepared for accusations. He had prepared for tears. He had not prepared for administration. He had not prepared for the woman who understood every hidden corner of his empire to leave quietly with documentation in her hands. Evelyn took the second bag. The combined weight pulled gently against her arm. Years of work. Years of protection. Years of truths no one else considered important enough to notice. Dominic stepped toward her. Leave the files. His voice was firmer now. Not loud. Not emotional. Simply accustomed to being obeyed. Evelyn stopped beside the study doorway and looked at him for several long seconds. Then her gaze moved beyond him to the closet where her clothes lay crushed inside black plastic bags. The contrast was almost poetic. They had chosen the dresses. She had chosen the evidence. They had chosen appearances. She had chosen reality. Slowly, she removed her wedding ring. The diamond caught the warm light one final time. 12 years compressed into a small circle of gold. She turned back toward the open trash bag nearest the closet entrance and dropped the ring onto a pile of wrinkled fabric. The soft metallic sound echoed louder than anyone expected. Chloe's smile disappeared. Dominic's mother froze. Dominic stared at the ring without speaking. Evelyn adjusted the strap of the leather bag on her shoulder. Her voice remained calm when she finally spoke. Now I have everything I came for. And for the first time that evening, Dominic Astor felt the faintest shadow of uncertainty. Evelyn Carlyle did not wait for permission. The uncertainty she saw flicker across Dominic Astor's face lasted less than a second, but it was enough. For 12 years she had studied markets, negotiations, boardrooms, and powerful people. She knew exactly how confidence looked when it cracked. The ring rested inside the trash bag among crushed dresses and discarded memories. Nobody moved to retrieve it. Dominic stared at it, as though he could somehow reverse what had just happened. Chloe Beaumont folded her arms tighter across her chest. Dominic's mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time that evening, none of them seemed certain which words belonged next. Evelyn turned away. The two black leather bags rested comfortably against her shoulder and forearm. They were heavier than jewelry and more valuable than any designer wardrobe left behind in the closet. She crossed the study threshold and stepped into the upper hallway. The mansion stretched before her in perfect silence. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished floors. Family portraits lined the walls in expensive gold frames. Generations of Astors stared down from painted canvases with expressions of inherited authority. Evelyn had walked these halls thousands of times. She had hosted charity events beneath these ceilings. She had welcomed senators, investors, celebrities, and foreign executives through these doors. She had spent years protecting the reputation represented by every portrait hanging on these walls. Yet tonight the mansion felt strangely unfamiliar. Not because it had changed, because she finally understood what it had always been. Behind her, Dominic's voice echoed down the hallway. "Evelyn." She stopped but did not turn around. The silence stretched between them. "You are making a mistake." His tone remained controlled, calm, measured. The voice of a man attempting to regain authority over a situation that no longer belonged to him. Evelyn looked ahead at the grand staircase descending toward the foyer. "No," she said quietly. "I spent 12 years correcting yours." The answer landed harder than an argument ever could have. She continued walking. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor. Dominic did not follow immediately. Perhaps he expected her to stop. Perhaps he expected emotion to pull her backward. Neither happened. At the top of the staircase, Evelyn paused for a moment. The massive chandelier hanging through the center of the house sparkled above her like frozen light. Below, the foyer appeared immaculate. White orchids stood in tall glass arrangements. Fresh flowers lined the entry hall. Every detail remained perfect. Wealth had always excelled at creating beautiful illusions. She began her descent, one step at a time, measured, calm, final. Halfway down the staircase, she noticed the housekeeper standing quietly near the lower landing. The older woman lowered her eyes respectfully. They had known each other for nearly a decade. She had witnessed more than she ever discussed. Evelyn offered a small nod. The housekeeper returned it. Nothing more needed to be said. Some people understood dignity without explanation. Dominic's mother finally appeared at the upper railing. "You are walking away from everything," she called down. Evelyn stopped near the bottom step. Slowly she looked up. "No." Her voice carried clearly through the foyer. "I am walking away from what you thought everything was." The older woman's expression hardened. Chloe appeared beside her, still dressed in white, still trying to look victorious. Yet something had changed. Confidence looked different when uncertainty entered the room. Evelyn reached the foyer. The front doors stood less than 20 feet away. Beyond the glass, twilight covered the estate grounds in shades of silver and blue. The private driver waited near the circular driveway. He stood beside the black luxury sedan, watching carefully without asking questions. Dominic descended the staircase at last. Not rushing, not chasing, simply following. That, more than anything, revealed his discomfort. Men like Dominic rarely followed anyone. Evelyn approached the front entrance. Her reflection appeared briefly in the glass doors. A black woman in a red dress carrying 2 leather bags. No wedding ring. No hesitation. No fear. The image surprised even her. She barely recognized the woman looking back. The doors opened. Cool evening air drifted into the foyer. The scent of rain lingered somewhere beyond the estate. Evelyn stepped outside. Gravel crunched beneath her heels. The mansion stood behind her, enormous and illuminated against the darkening sky. Dominic stopped in the doorway. For a moment neither spoke. The distance between them measured only a few yards, yet it felt larger than 12 years. Evelyn placed the first leather bag inside the back seat. Then the second. Her phone vibrated softly. One unread message appeared on the screen. "Secure Compliance Office. Confirmation request pending." She looked at the notification without opening it. Then she lifted her eyes toward the mansion one final time. Dominic remained framed inside the doorway, surrounded by wealth, power, and people who still believed he controlled the future. Evelyn slipped her phone into her purse and closed the car door. Somewhere deep inside those 2 black leather bags rested information capable of changing far more than a marriage. And for the first time that evening, she allowed herself a single private thought. They still had no idea what she was carrying away. Evelyn Carlyle settled into the back seat of the black sedan as the estate gates began to open ahead of her. The mansion receded behind tinted glass, glowing with warm light and expensive certainty. For years, that house had represented achievement. To outsiders, it symbolized success, influence, and stability. Tonight, it looked different. Tonight, it resembled a monument built on selective memory. The driver pulled forward without speaking. He had worked for the Astor family long enough to recognize when silence carried more value than conversation. The gravel driveway stretched nearly half a mile through old trees and carefully maintained gardens before reaching the iron gates. Evelyn rested one hand lightly on the nearest leather bag. Her phone vibrated again. The same message remained waiting. Secure compliance office. Confirmation request pending. She did not open it yet. Instead, she watched the estate disappear behind her and allowed herself something she had avoided all evening. Memory. 12 years earlier, there had been no mansion, no private drivers, no magazine covers, no boardrooms filled with executives eager to impress Dominic Astor. There had only been a small office above a failing retail store in downtown Chicago. The heating system barely worked during winter. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained. Dominic owned a second-hand desk, 2 folding chairs, and an ambition larger than his resources. Evelyn remembered climbing those narrow stairs carrying takeout containers after finishing 12-hour consulting shifts. Dominic would still be working beneath fluorescent lights long after everyone else had gone home. Back then, he listened when she spoke. He asked questions. He valued her opinions. He treated her intelligence like an asset instead of a convenience. She remembered the first major crisis. A lender had threatened to withdraw financing 72 hours before a critical acquisition. Dominic had been convinced the company would collapse. He spent an entire night pacing across stained carpet while reviewing impossible numbers. Evelyn sat beside him until dawn. By sunrise, she had restructured the financing model, identified alternative collateral, and created the proposal that ultimately saved the deal. When the agreement closed 3 weeks later, Dominic received all the credit. He celebrated by buying pizza and telling everyone he had found a solution at the last minute. Evelyn never corrected the story. At the time, love made that feel reasonable. The city lights passed beyond the window. Downtown towers reflected against the dark glass like fragments of another life. Evelyn remembered more moments. Investor presentations rewritten at 2 o'clock in the morning. Emergency negotiations handled quietly behind closed doors. Public crises prevented before journalists discovered them. Tax exposure corrected. Debt structures repaired. Regulatory concerns resolved. Dominic always stood at the podium afterward. Dominic always appeared in the headlines. Evelyn remained behind the curtain because she believed partnership mattered more than recognition. The realization no longer hurt. It simply explained things. The driver merged onto the highway leading toward the city center. Rain began falling lightly against the windshield. Tiny droplets scattered across the glass beneath the sweep of the wipers. Evelyn looked down at her bare left hand resting against the leather bag. The absence of the wedding ring felt strangely peaceful. For years, she had carried responsibilities heavier than gold. The ring had merely disguised them. Her phone illuminated once more. This time, another message appeared beneath the first. Attorney Morgan Reed. Are you ready to proceed? Evelyn stared at the screen. 2 questions. 2 decisions. Both waiting. Neither reversible. Outside, traffic flowed through the evening. Thousands of strangers moved toward dinners, apartments, meetings, and families. Ordinary lives continued uninterrupted while an empire approached a fault line invisible to everyone except the woman sitting quietly in the back of a sedan. She finally opened the compliance message. A secure authentication page appeared. 3 simple words waited at the center of the screen. Verification required immediately. Evelyn's reflection stared back at her from the darkened display. Calm eyes. Red dress. No hesitation. She thought about Dominic standing in the mansion doorway. She thought about Chloe believing she had won. She thought about his mother packing clothing into trash bags while dismissing 12 years of contribution. None of them understood the truth. The clothing had never mattered. The jewelry had never mattered. The mansion had never mattered. What mattered was knowledge. What mattered was documentation. What mattered was the difference between ownership and dependency. Dominic believed She was leaving empty-handed because he had spent years misunderstanding what she actually carried. Evelyn entered the authentication code. The screen changed immediately. Submission accepted. Additional contact pending. She exhaled slowly. Not from fear. Not from relief. From certainty. Beside her, the leather bags remained silent. Inside them rested years of records nobody else considered important enough to protect. Ahead, the city skyline emerged through rain and darkness. Glass towers reflected silver light across wet streets. Somewhere downtown, people were already waiting to receive information Dominic Astor never imagined would leave his control. Evelyn slipped the phone back into her purse and looked toward the glowing skyline. For the first time all evening, she was no longer thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what would happen when the wrong people finally learned what she knew. Evelyn Carlisle arrived downtown just after 8 o'clock. Rain glazed the streets in silver reflections while office towers rose above the city like walls of glass and light. The black sedan slowed in front of a federal building that looked almost disappointingly ordinary. Beige stone, narrow windows, security barriers. Nothing about it suggested the influence hidden inside. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door, but Evelyn was already reaching for the leather bags. She carried them herself. The weight felt familiar. Years of responsibility often do. Inside the lobby, fluorescent lighting reflected across polished floors. Security officers checked identification with practiced efficiency. Government buildings never impressed wealthy people. That was their strength. Power often worked best when it looked unremarkable. Evelyn presented her identification and signed the visitor log. One of the officers glanced briefly at the 2 leather bags before directing her toward a private elevator. No questions. No curiosity. Just procedure. The elevator doors closed softly. For a moment she stood alone, surrounded by brushed steel walls and silence. Her reflection appeared faintly in the metal surface. Red dress. Bare left hand. 2 black bags. The image looked nothing like the wife who had entered the Astor mansion that morning. The elevator stopped on the 11th floor. A woman in a navy suit waited beside a secured doorway. She appeared to be in her late 50s, composed and observant. The kind of person who noticed details before other people recognized their importance. "Ms. Carlisle?" she asked. Evelyn nodded. "Thank you for coming." No sympathy. No judgment. Just professionalism. Evelyn appreciated that. The woman escorted her through a series of quiet hallways before stopping outside a conference room. Frosted glass concealed the interior. Through the faint outline, several figures were already seated at the table, waiting. The woman opened the door. The room itself was surprisingly simple. Long table, neutral walls, coffee service in one corner. 4 people sat inside. An attorney, a financial investigator, a compliance specialist, and a senior federal analyst whose reputation Evelyn recognized immediately. Serious people, experienced people, people who understood what documentation could do. Nobody looked surprised when she entered. One of them rose politely. "Ms. Carlisle, we appreciate your cooperation." Evelyn placed both leather bags on the table. The sound seemed louder than it should have. Every person in the room looked at them, not because of the bags themselves, because of what they might contain. The senior analyst folded his hands. "Before we begin, I want to be clear. You are here voluntarily." "Yes. And the materials you referenced in your communication are in those bags?" Evelyn looked down at them. Years of records. Years of decisions. Years of hidden realities. "Some of them," she answered. The analyst exchanged a glance with the attorney. "Some." Evelyn unzipped the first bag. Inside rested encrypted drives arranged carefully in protective cases, each labeled by year and project code. The compliance specialist leaned forward immediately. Professional interest replaced polite distance. Evelyn opened the second bag. Printed files, financial schedules, internal correspondence, transaction records, handwritten notes, meeting summaries. A decade of institutional memory preserved by someone everyone assumed was merely standing beside the man receiving credit. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The silence felt different from the silence inside the mansion. This silence contained attention, respect. The analyst removed his glasses and set them carefully on the table. "How long have you been documenting this?" Evelyn thought about the question. The answer stretched across years. Across midnight phone calls, emergency meetings, quiet corrections, Small decisions that became large consequences. Long enough to know the difference between a mistake and a pattern. The room grew still. The investigator opened one of the files and began reviewing its contents. His expression changed almost immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. Experienced professionals rarely showed emotion, which made small reactions important. The attorney turned several pages from another document. Then another. Then another. No one reached for the coffee anymore. Outside the conference room windows, rain continued falling over the city. Downtown lights blurred across the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere several miles away, Dominic Astor was probably sitting inside his mansion believing the evening had gone exactly as planned. Evelyn wondered how long that confidence would survive. Her phone vibrated softly inside her purse. One incoming call. Dominic Astor. She looked at the screen without answering. A second call followed less than a minute later. Then a third. The analyst noticed the glowing display. He did not ask who it was. He already knew. Evelyn silenced the phone and returned it to her purse. The attorney slowly closed one of the folders. Ms. Carlyle, he said carefully. Does Mr. Astor know you retained copies of all this? Evelyn looked at the files spread across the table. She thought about the mansion, the trash bags, the ring, the certainty in Dominic's voice when he told her to leave. Then she met the attorney's eyes. No, she replied. He stopped paying attention years ago. And somewhere across the city, while Dominic continued calling a phone that would not answer, the first pieces of his carefully protected world had already begun changing hands. The conference room remained quiet long after the files were opened. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while investigators moved from document to document with growing concentration. Evelyn Carlyle sat calmly at the far end of the table, watching professionals discover what she had spent years protecting. No one rushed. No one reacted dramatically. Real consequences rarely announced themselves with noise. They arrived through careful reading, verified records, and uncomfortable patterns. One investigator stopped at a series of transaction schedules and slowly adjusted his glasses. Another reviewed correspondence attached to a restructuring project completed 4 years earlier. The attorney began making notes on a yellow legal pad. Every few minutes someone asked a question. Evelyn answered clearly. Dates, meetings, signatures, approvals. The information came easily because she had lived through all of it. Across town, Dominic Astor remained unaware of the atmosphere forming around his name. His fourth call arrived shortly after 9 o'clock. Then a fifth. Then a sixth. Evelyn ignored everyone. Eventually, a text message appeared. We need to talk. She read it once and returned her phone to her purse. The request felt almost ironic. For years, she had tried to talk. She had tried to explain risks. She had tried to discuss decisions. She had tried to be heard. Dominic had only listened when agreement was convenient. The senior analyst finally closed one of the larger folders and leaned back in his chair. His expression revealed nothing, which somehow made it more significant. Ms. Carlyle, he said, when did you first realize there might be a problem? Evelyn considered the question carefully. The answer was not simple. There had never been one dramatic moment. No single discovery. No shocking revelation. Instead, there had been small inconsistencies accumulating over time. Numbers that did not align. Transactions structured in unusual ways. Approvals requested without documentation. Financial decisions justified by confidence instead of evidence. She folded her hands. About 6 years ago. The analyst raised an eyebrow. 6 years. Evelyn nodded. That was when I started keeping independent records. The room became noticeably quieter. The attorney stopped writing. One of the investigators looked up immediately. 6 years changed everything. 6 years was not reaction. 6 years was preparation. The analyst exchanged a glance with the compliance specialist. Both seemed to reach the same conclusion at the same time. Evelyn had not arrived carrying emotional accusations. She had arrived carrying history. Meanwhile, several miles away, Dominic stood inside his private office overlooking the estate grounds. His untouched glass of bourbon rested on the desk beside a phone that refused to connect. The mansion felt different tonight. Chloe had attempted conversation during dinner. His mother had offered criticism disguised as advice. Neither helped. Dominic kept replaying the evening in his mind. The ring dropping into the trash bag. The leather bags. The absence of emotion. Most of all, the certainty in Evelyn's voice. Something about it continued bothering him. Chloe entered the office shortly after 9:30. She wore a cream sweater now instead of the white dress from earlier. "You are still calling her?" she asked carefully. Dominic did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the dark window overlooking the property. "She has never ignored me before." Chloe attempted a reassuring smile. "She is upset." Dominic finally looked at her. "No." The answer came faster than he intended. Chloe's expression tightened. Dominic looked away again. Upset was familiar. Angry was familiar. Hurt was familiar. What he had seen tonight was something else. The memory returned uninvited. Evelyn carrying those bags. Evelyn leaving the ring. Evelyn refusing every opportunity to argue. Confidence slowly gave way to discomfort. Back downtown, another investigator opened one of the encrypted drives. A series of folders appeared on the screen. Year after year, project after project. Detailed records arranged with extraordinary precision. The compliance specialist stared at the organization for several seconds. "This is extensive." Evelyn offered a small nod. "I prefer documentation." The specialist almost smiled. That may be the understatement of the year. Several people around the table exchanged brief looks. Not amused. Impressed. The analyst turned toward Evelyn again. "Did anyone else know you kept copies?" "No. Not even Mr. Astor?" "Especially not Mr. Astor." That answer lingered in the room. Outside, the rain began falling harder against the glass. The city lights blurred into streaks of silver and gold. The attorney closed another folder and exhaled slowly. "I think your husband made a significant miscalculation." Evelyn looked toward the dark window beyond the conference room. For years, people had assumed Dominic Astor built everything. The company, the fortune, the reputation, the future. Tonight, for the first time, a room full of experts was beginning to understand a different possibility. And somewhere inside the growing silence that followed, the real shift in power finally began.